Sherlock Holmes is without a doubt one of the most popular characters in the history of fiction. This is a character whose early history from the pages of the Strand magazine practically created what can best be described as the first fandom. Readers were ravenous for new adventures of the brilliant sleuth, even though Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wanted to be rid of him. The character's lasting appeal is undeniable, as he holds the record for most portrayed character on stage and screen. In recent years, the character has had a massive resurgence of popularity. While the Guy Ritchie films are supremely entertaining and helped paint a more accurate take on the character, it's the TV series Sherlock that caused the intrepid detective to blow up in the 21st century, and while he was at it, catapulted the career of Benedict Cumberbatch. The show was conceived by Stephen Moffatt and Mark Gatiss. The two writers were rabid fans of the characters and decided to make their own take on the characters set in modern times. After the success of their modern retelling of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, titled simply Jekyll, the BBC were more than inclined to produce Moffatt and Gatiss' next project. However, instead of a basic series format, as was originally intended, it was opted that the series consist of 3 TV movies per season. While this has proven frustrating for fans of the show, it did help in developing the stories more thoroughly. 4 seasons, 12 episodes, and 1 special. Where does each episode place on the ascending scale? Well, that's what we intend to explore on this 2-part edition of Less to More. Before we start, we're going to get into some key plot details here in order to analyze each one, so you have been warned. Without further ado, let's start climbing. It's funny, but the episode I consider the weakest came from the show's first season. I suppose the primary reason why is simply that the blind banker is just dull. The mystery isn't particularly engaging, the pacing is wonky, and while the story does make sense, it's just nothing special. In many of the episodes to come, there was intrigue, tension, humor, and blessed eccentricity. The blind banker is just about a smuggling ring, and the majority of the episode is spent deciphering a Chinese cipher. The editing and direction does its damnedest to make this interesting, and it does culminate in a nail-biting confrontation in a tunnel, but it comes way too late, and by the time you finish it, you're left pondering, why did it take so long to get to this point? By and large, this story had nothing special in it to warrant repeat viewings. One does feel like the story was something of a missed opportunity. Obviously, this episode is a modern take on one of the most famous Holmes stories, so the stakes were understandably high on this one. Now to start. The reason this episode works is that the acting is absolutely marvelous, in particular from Russell Tovey as the perpetually tormented Henry Knight. Tovey is gripping in his portrayal of a man with a traumatic past who is gradually slipping as he digs deeper into the conspiracy. Then there's Cumberbatch's performance when he finds himself doubting his senses as he struggles with his reality after thinking he saw a spectral hound. So, why is this one so low on the list? Frankly, because with such strong material throughout, it all leads to a resolution that is frustratingly incomprehensible. First there's a hound, but oh no, it's just a hallucination brought about by a chemical from a secret government project. Oh, then, wait, now there is a hound. So what was it? I've watched this one multiple times and I'm still dumbfounded as to the final resolution, but really that isn't the only problem here. The episode maybe should have been a standalone, a la The Abominable Bride. Because of all their efforts to meld this story with the rest of the season, frankly, that stuff felt tacked on and forced. The epilogue with Moriarty just didn't mesh with the rest of it. For a highly anticipated adaptation of one of the quintessential Holmes tales, it should have been given more attention. The interesting thing about The Six Thatchers is that once this one focuses on the core story, that's when it kicks off good and proper. To its credit, as a standalone story, it works. It does a fantastic job of delving into Mary's past as a mercenary, and we got some lovely twists and turns regarding who the culprit is, all culminating in an utterly wrenching death scene, which really is more than Mary got in the original stories. So it begs the question, why was this series premiere so unloved by the fans? One could probably assume that because Series 3 ended with such a mammoth cliffhanger that unless the next episode jumped right into that mystery, we were never going to be satisfied. Instead, we get sidetracked by Mary's sordid history, which, to be fair, isn't boring, and Amanda Abington is still consistently great in the role. So one has to wonder, was it underwhelming because of the story on its own? Or was it because it wasn't the one audiences expected it to be? This one just dropped a whole bunch of character history we weren't expecting. Strangely enough, a lot of the plot points in this episode had been foreshadowed in His Last Vow, particularly Redbeard, so you can't say this came out of nowhere. A strange stigma of Season 4 was that it progressed in ways that audiences just didn't expect and possibly didn't want. The question is, what did you want? One of the motivating factors of the show was that Sherlock Holmes was a brilliant detective who was detached from humanity because of his personality. His friendship with Watson is what tethers him to humanity and helps him keep focus on the real heart of a mystery. Sometimes the intricacies of a case can't be solved by deductive reasoning, sometimes it's about understanding humanity. Sherlock has never been able to solve his most traumatic case because of his detachment, but thanks to his friendship with Watson, he was able to see his sister in a way that his cold, calculating brother couldn't, and was finally able to solve her puzzle and absolve him of his torments. The episode itself possesses layers, but hides them in a Saw-style horror story, which deludes you into thinking it's just gimmicky, and maybe that's to its disadvantage. It may well cheapen some of the aforementioned character revelations and treated them as trivial, which for a story which may well be the last episode of the series, it might be underwhelming. However, when you take into account where the story leaves the characters in the end, it's actually quite uplifting and fires you up for more adventures to come. Even if we never get any, it's not a bad place to leave it. It can definitely be admitted that Season 4 was something of a melancholy season, and this story epitomizes that sentiment. On one side, you have Watson still reeling over the death of his wife, particularly after he succumbed to the temptation of another woman. Then you have Sherlock, who is also blaming himself for Mary's death and acquiescing to his own demons. And all the while, we're greeted with an utterly despicable villain in the form of Culverton Smith, who toys with Sherlock to the point of driving him to near madness. Morose it may be, this story still does an excellent job playing with your perceptions, specifically the way Sherlock's hallucinations could in fact be a hazard to himself and everyone around him. Smith is a villain, most definitely, but is he the monster that Sherlock makes him out to be? Or is it all the product of Sherlock's drug-induced mania? The episode does an excellent job keeping things on a heightened sense of tension as Sherlock's mental health declines and becomes erratic, and on a performance level, Cumberbatch is dominating it. It's safe to surmise that this was the point in Sherlock Holmes' history that he really wanted to portray. If there's any niggle to have with this story, it's that if they really wanted to mess with our sense of reality, they shouldn't have shown us so much about Culverton Smith in the beginning. It would have been interesting to have us doubting Sherlock all the way through. This was about as meta as any episode of the series was ever going to get. It had been a long time since Season 2 left us on a massive cliffhanger. Miraculously, Sherlock was still alive after a blatantly fatal fall from the roof of St. Bart's, and during that time, internet theories ranged from the intricate to the downright mental, which leaves one to realize that whatever answer we get from the inevitable return would not please everyone. Solution? Totally take the piss out of them. The episode dishes out so many ridiculous scenarios of how Sherlock survived that by the end of the episode it really doesn't matter. What did matter was Sherlock returning to Watson's life despite the fact that John has definitely moved on with his utterly brilliant fiancée Mary Morstan, who is absolutely likable upon first meeting and is totally down for the madness that would inevitably follow when Sherlock re-entered their lives. The one element that weighs this story down is the case itself. It's not particularly interesting. You get the vibe that if Mycroft didn't request Sherlock to do this, he would have put this to the bottom of the pile. Fortunately, everything else keeps this episode from landing at the bottom of this pile. What we thought was going to be a mere trifle to sate our appetites during yet another intolerable gap between seasons turned out to be an absolutely mental prologue, making us even hungrier for the season to come. What made it more fun was that everyone was clearly down for it. After all, Sherlock is, and has been admitted to be, well-produced fanfiction designed to show traditional Sherlock in a different time than we're used to. Well, we've gotten used to seeing Sherlock in the now, so what would it be like to see this cast in these variations of the characters in the traditional setting and how they clash with Victorian values? It's also particularly cunning how gradually modern lingo started leaking into the dialogue, which makes for a cunning segue into the big reveal that we are currently inside Sherlock's mind palace as he works out a cold case from the 19th century, all in aid of working out how Moriarty could still be alive after his mind-blowing demise. And, with all that foreshadowing, a wealth of dangers to come.